Hello again, good people, and welcome to the To Be Encouraged podcast with Bishop Julius C. Trimble. This is the podcast where we look to offer an encouraging word in an often discouraged world. I'm your co-host, Reverend Dr. Brad Miller. Bishop Trimble, welcome to our conversation today, my friend.
Thank you, Brad. It's good to be with you. It's good to be a blessing and to journey into a new year, 2026. Wow.
Absolutely.
2025 flew by, but I guess it didn't. But
All
here we
right.
are in a new year, new opportunity to praise God and to bless people and to deal with serious issues that are
Yes.
facing our society and our church.
Well, as you mentioned, we're in a new year, but we have continued to deal with some really dramatic, traumatic issues in our society as we speak. We are uh, in our conversation prior to us recording, we were talking about the murders that happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the hands of ICE agents, and how that has disrupted things. And so we kind of live in a time of chaos in our society, and where there has been a kind of a deconstruction of the civil order and all kinds of things happening here. And we're in a time of chaos. So you're all about peace, and you are all about encouraging words. Give me some thoughts you may have today, Bishop, about peace and encouragement in a time of chaos.
But I think back, I was just reviewing, I shared this in a sermon I preached recently that the early Methodists in 1908 drafted what was considered a very radical statement. It was called the Social Creed.
Yes.
Uh, and the last statement of that Social Creed in 1908, drafted by Methodists before we became United Methodists, and we still were a church uh, full of some contradictions, but nonetheless, the General Conference of the Methodist Church, the predecessor to the United Methodist Church, passed the Social Creed. The last statement of that Social Creed said uh, that Methodists advocated for the use of the Golden Rule.
Hmm.
I'm
Interesting.
paraphrasing,
Sure.
the use of the Golden Rule as a guideline for society and our relationships, and basically that all people should be treated as we would want to be treated ourselves, and that the golden rule served as the remedy of all social ills.
Hmm.
Now that may been a bit of an overstatement, but the Methodists felt so strongly, Brad, in 1908, they passed this at the General Conference in Baltimore, Maryland, without dissent,
Okay.
and they felt it was so important that they delivered the Social Creed right after the General Conference to the White House to President Theodore Roosevelt. They delivered it, hand delivered it to the White House.
Yes.
I would think, I would pray that the church would be so bold, and we saw this in Minnesota. The faith community should be so bold that we stand before injustice and cry out and speak directly to those who've been elected to leadership to say, whatever happened to the golden rule? That we should treat
What
people in a way that we would want to be treated.
What a great question, and what a direct and pertinent question to the day we live in, with so many people seem to have tossed out all civil, basic civility towards one another, regardless of your feelings about law and order and so on. People are just being brutal to one another, and I've been impressed what I have heard about the faith community in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and other places there locally, and also, people coming in from other places to be helpful there. And I understand that one of our larger United Methodist churches, Hennepin Avenue there in Minneapolis, the pastor was arrested and when the protest, for instance. And I've heard other stories of people being involved with peaceful protests of the faith community, engaged with other aspects of the community in that particular time of violence and disorder. So tell me a little more about what stories you're hearing, and what are some ways that, just like they did in 1908, they went right to the White House to present the Golden Rule, the Methodist version of the Golden Methodist take on the Golden Rule. What are some ways we can speak truth to power? What are ways we can speak a faithful message, either in Minneapolis or Indianapolis or Washington, D.C., or wherever it would be? What's your take on that, my friend?
Well, I think, some of what we see happening, not just in Minneapolis, but around the country, the United States, that is, and around the world, that, as someone quoted, "There are more of us than them," meaning there are more people who are just plain citizens who want a compassionate democracy and a government devoid of constant chaos, and categorizing people as being shithole countries or
Hmm.
being illegal aliens. You know and I believe I would have to confess, I remember when that term used to come first came out, it seemed so normal. It seems so offensive to me now when I heard one elected representative from Florida saying, "Well, they're in Minneapolis pursuing illegal aliens." And when I think of aliens, I think of the movie, monster movies of
Oh,
aliens. I'm
yeah.
thinking, so
ET.
what's the opposite? I guess is there such a thing as legal aliens? Are people not people?
Hmm.
And Brad, when we get to the point where we can other people in such a way that we dehumanize them, then that becomes acceptable to a certain part of the population. The president said they were going to go after criminals and drug cartels and violent persons who committed violent offenses. And now we see children being separated from their families.
Yes. Yes. Oh
We
my
see
God.
mothers being snatched from the workplace. And we see workers refusing to go to work on farms. So, my prayer has always been, this is prior to the current Trump administration, that there would be bipartisan work on comprehensive immigration reform, which has not happened, and hence we got this. It seems to be extremism,
Hmm.
and what is it seems as though rather than being a government of law and order, we see a government where we have state sanctions murders and a government of disorder. Now, I believe that the faith community, this is a moment for us individually to speak up in our own local communities because what has happened to others, we realize happens to us. Renee Good and Mr. Petty, the most recent person, are happen to be white citizens, but there was 8 other people who were murdered or either were hit or were killed in some other way prior to this by ICE agents or Border Patrol. 31 people, according to the New York Times I was reading, have died in detention facilities. Some of them were under suspect circumstances.
Right.
So
Right.
we know that people are dying as a result of this effort for mass deportation.
And there's some people have just
And so
some people have just disappeared flat out. Their families can't have any contact with them. They've just been taken off the streets and gone. That is scary stuff. That is
that's
scary
scary stuff.
stuff. And I heard reports from one pastor friend of mine about how also it's kind of the surveillance side of things. How they went to some sort of checkpoint at Minneapolis, and the uh, the ICE agent saw their face and said, "Oh, it's you again. We'll see you again next time. We've got you on record." In other words, they kept this person. They recognized them. They had them on their phone or whatever it was. So people were being surveilled. People's names were being taken. There is some scary stuff going on. You said something in our conversation about kind of this is the deconstruction, if you will, of the social order. And so I think this may be a real seminal moment for the faith community to step up. Uh, I'm going to ask you this question because I don't know if I feel qualified to really uh, relate to it other than kind of the gut level era reaction. It seems like there may be some similarity to the civil rights era, the mid '60s, in terms of there needs to be some turning points where the faith community and the community at large say, okay, enough's enough. This is ridiculous. Do you see any parallels here, my friend, in that?
Yeah, well, a lot of things happen after the 2 things, people say were pivotal points. There were a number of pivotal points. early in the 50s, they said it was Rosa Parks refusing to
Right.
give up her seat. But in the 60s, uh, before the Civil Rights Bill was passed, or before the Voting Rights Bill was passed, you know, 4 girls were killed in
Yeah.
Birmingham,
Right. A bombing.
and
Yeah.
people saw on television, water hoses and dogs being released on children and high school students in Birmingham, Alabama, and that began. I think when people saw what happened now, Brad, as you know, with cameras, I mean, with video, with smartphones, and we basically are recording things that we previously did not see and would not we were not. So the first report coming from, I think the Attorney General, it was the Attorney General of the Homeland Security, whichever one of them, it wasn't, yeah, Homeland Security was, that these officers were attacked, with a person brandishing a gun and so forth, and only to find out that the video of what happened, at least the murder of this citizen, uh, wasn't the way it was reported. And so
Yeah.
prior to
And there was
when we record things,
and
we
there
should
was ample video evidence. There was really no question here. These were outright murders because there was several angles and so on of the videos. There was no gray area here. There was none. And so that is the evidence there. And just, I think this could be a turning point, but I don't know. I think the faith community has to step up. The community at large has to step up. And I think encouragement, say what you think, Mr. Trimble. Encouragement isn't always only, kind of a good word, but what's the good actions of encouragement? What are the things we have to do as people of faith to take action? We know of people of faith who are showing up for the protests and so on, and 10 below zero temperatures and so on. Speak to that kind of the difference between encouraging words and encouraging actions.
Well, I think our prayer should be linked with our participation and sometimes our protests. Let me say that again. Our prayer should be linked to our personal participation and often our protests of those things that would be not pleasing to God.
So
The other thing
thoughts.
is,
So just to
I
interject,
would say that that's
I'm sorry. Go
the
ahead.
second thing I would say is that our liturgy often should also be linked. A liturgy should be linked to legislation
Yeah.
values the lives of people. All of us are children of God.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just so it sounds to me what you're saying, thoughts and prayers is just it's a start. It's not the end all and be all. It's not just thoughts and prayers. It's thoughts and prayers and action and legislation and people involved. Is that part of what we're saying here?
Yes, and what I like about at least the Wesleyan theological perspective is that our religion and our faith is both personal and social.
Yeah.
And when you think back about you and I, studied in seminary, but going back to the end of the 19th century and the 20th century, with the onset of what was called the social gospel,
Hmm.
the Walter Rauschenbusch and the Reinhold Niebers of the world, who basically said that, okay, Jesus' death on the cross wasn't just an atonement for the sinful man, but it was an expression of love that should be translated into transforming the society to
Yeah.
reflect the love of Jesus Christ. That's a broad oversimplification,
Sure.
but
But
what I like about the social gospel, the way in which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. embraced it and the civil rights movement embraced it too, was that, yeah, we cannot, we say this, we cannot say we love God, and yet we have segmented the society so that some people are considered full citizens with full rights and privileges, and we have another whole set of citizens. I'm just reading an article in the paper about someone's writing a column saying, "You can't denaturalize me."
mm,
We have people now, Brad, who are saying we can denaturalize people who have been naturalized, who are now citizens.
right,
People
right.
who had legal status for being in the country, people who've been naturalized, and I think we talked previously before about people going through the 5-year process of becoming citizens, only to find out that they couldn't complete the process because the country they were born in is now on a list
Mm,
of countries that can no longer travel to the United States, can no longer get visas to come into the United States. So this is just blatant discrimination.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what we see, Grant, let me what we see now really can be traced back to, many say, it's not just to the 1930s, the rise of the Gestapo or Nazism, but if you go back to 1793 and 1880, the Fugitive Slave Act.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that the government, so it was approved by Congress that persons who had escaped from slavery and found themselves in states, what they call free states, they could be tracked down across, state borders, across into Canada, wherever they, and if you impeded the quote unquote slave catchers, um, that you would be subject to the penalty. And this is what we heard from the Tom Holman and others who were saying, if people impede the work of the Border Patrol or ICE, if you impede the work, then you too are subject to being arrested, and bad things can happen to you. This is what's being said. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been put.
Yeah.
Bad things can happen to you if you exercise your
Well,
right.
and bad things are happening. That's the thing. It's not just a threat. Bad things are happening. People are being scooped off the streets. You have confrontations going on where people who are unarmed or legally armed in some cases, like the man who was killed in Minneapolis recently, and being when you're shot 10 times, you have been, that you have it is a ridiculous
Mm.
reaction to the thing there. And I know they're also looking to leverage old laws, some of the laws that were used to incarcerate like Japanese Americans during World War II and things like this, which was a horrible thing then. But they're looking to revive some pretty ugly stuff in order to have their racist agenda enacted. And that's just exactly what it is. It's a racist agenda, and it's sickening. It's sickening, and we, you know, it's happening, and yet we got to be a voice of encouragement, is what you keep harping on all the time, my friend. And I admire
Mhm.
you so much for that, because sometimes it's hard. It's this whole thing about the golden rule, for instance. It's got a lot of it's just based on the great commandment of God, of Jesus, to love God and love neighbor. And I think some people have just kind of lost that whole second part altogether.
Yes, and people wanted to get down in the weeds and test Jesus on it, and, "Who is my neighbor?"
Mm,
Jesus used a wonderful, a long-standing example, with the Good Samaritan, and some commentators have said the question was, the Good Samaritan didn't ask, "What will happen to me if I don't, help this person," but what will happen to him, or what it will happen to that person if I don't stop and help. And I think, the 2 persons that were most recently killed in Minneapolis, uh, had already resolved that question. They had
mm.
decided that they would stand on the side of protecting their neighbors, uh, notwithstanding maybe some of them could have been s arrested and eventually deported, but the way in which the government has gone about this is so brutal, and so traumatizing to communities, uh, that it just we could have predicted this, and it seems so, so much part of a retribution because it happens just happens to happen in particular communities where the current administration, uh, was not
Yeah,
more was popular, didn't get votes, and
it's
then it didn't.
it's absolutely targeted, absolutely targeted. I have a son lives in Portland, Oregon. He says that they've had a ICE presence there for a long time, but he says they're just kind of bracing there for when more ICE people roll in to be even more violent. So they're kind of bracing there. So, all right, I want to bring this around, Bishop, to some. You work in the world of church and society and social justice. in your position in the church, and you've always been involved with that as a bishop in the church, as a local church pastor. And I know from my own experience that there are people in local communities who are really disturbed by what is going on. They have these gut wrenching times personally. Pastors are dealing with gut wrenching times personally, and this going on. So, and some people are able to go and to protest. In Minneapolis, and you and I both live in Indiana. There's been a protest here at the detention centers here. I know of there's protests going on around the country. Not everybody can do that, but what can people not everybody can travel, not everybody's willing to risk that, and there's there's something to be said for people being mindful of the cost that's involved with it. But how can people involved in their local church, in their local community, in some way or another, to make a stand for justice in the midst of this chaos?
People could raise the question in their communities of faith, you know, if we're not talking about this, why are we not talking about this in our communities of faith,
Yes.
in our Sunday school classes, in our Bible studies, in our reflections on our sermon? Because, it is important that we worship our God, but it's also important that we live in the real world in real time. And so these things are happening, and how is what is happening reflect upon our baptismal vows, our membership vows, or whatever denomination we may be a part of. And some people aren't maybe built or feel like I'm not the person to go out on a protest. I'm too aged or infirmed or too young, or I'm just afraid to do that. What we can do is to reach out to our elected officials, particularly in the Senate and Congress. We all have congressmen and congresswomen, senators. And every state has two senators. I've written the senators in the state of Indiana because I live in Indiana, and said that we have an overfunded, militarized border patrol and ICE police department, and at the same time people in North Carolina who experienced horrible devastation through storms, hurricanes and flooding and storms are still waiting. Houses still haven't been built, bridges haven't been restored because FEMA doesn't have as much money
Yeah. Yeah.
as we have, and we're chasing people all on the interior of the country, with border patrol officers. So it just doesn't make sense. And we should be putting tremendous pressure on our elected officials, as well as asking the question, how does this reflect on the kind of society we want to see?
Hmm.
How does this reflect on the kind of world we want to see? Uh, because all of us at some point, a door was open to us, a community was open to us, an invitation was extended to us, uh, and somehow we have selective amnesia
Hmm.
about that.
Well, wonderful words here to be helpful. It's time to take some action in your local community and to put the pressure where the pressure needs to be applied. And because we have, the time for complacency is over with, I believe. And we have to, I just, Jesus was a man of action. He had men and women of action who followed him. And so here we are in this day and age to take action for the sake of the gospel, to not only to live out the golden rule through the great commandment, but also to live out the great commission to make disciples, but also to learn how the acts of kindness from the beatitudes and so on about the acts of how we treat people matters uh, as well. And so I think that's where I'd like to ask you to kind of wrap up our conversation here with what what is Jesus saying right now to our particular circumstances in our country, in our local communities as we deal, as you have said earlier, this kind of to how are we indeed of voice of Jesus in the midst of chaos. So what's Jesus saying to us now? Let's bring it around to that, my friend.
Well, you alluded to it when you made reference to the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain
Yes.
mercy." And blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. It's the word, the translation, Greek translation for righteousness is the same word for justice. So
Mm,
you could put justice where in that verse, Matthew, I think, you know, uh, maybe the 12th verse there, Matthew 5, blessed are those who seek justice, for they shall be satisfied. And at the very end of that pericope, that Sermon on the Mount, it says, blessed are those who, who are persecuted. I'm paraphrasing, call all kind of vile things on
right.
my sake because you are pursuing justice. You are indeed, and then blessed are the peacemakers, for
Yes.
they should be called what the children of God. So
Yes.
if we really want to be called the children, and we can't say we're a follower of Jesus, and yet we refuse to exemplify a society and relationships that reflect mercy, reflect humility, reflect empathy, reflects uh, 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 sacrifice, charity, compassion. Those things that seem to be absent in a lot. There's a new notion now being preached that might makes right again,
Mm, wow.
and that
Yeah.
we can become great by ourselves. And I never believed that, and I will not believe that. And Jesus says, "Remember who you are." He says to his disciples and to us, "You are salt and you are light."
Yes.
And yeah, I know you've been hearing it lately, but salt melts ice.
Yeah.
So,
Salt melts
so,
ice. I love it. I love it.
so if we want to be the salt of the earth, we have to realize, and the light of the world. Dr. King says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only
Yeah.
light can do that. Hatred cannot drive out hatred. Only love can." I don't hate my president. I don't hate anyone, but I do. I am angered, Brad, by the way in which we have allowed state-sanctioned violence to become normalized and defended, and political retribution to go without any protest. That's what disappoints me most about, particularly some of our elected officials. They're just watching this campaign of retribution as if it's normal.
Mm. Love
So
what you sh
I say to everyone, remember, you are called to be salt and you're called to be light. If we
and
hang
water.
on to that, we'll find our voice to speak out and we'll find our ways to teach our children. Someone shared to me, I don't know who was saying this, that they would be embarrassed to have their children sit down and watch our president. And we should be able to say to our children and grandchildren, let's sit down and listen to what the president has to say.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
that
No
president
way. No way.
should be an example of, you know, powerful, compassionate, you know, uh, uh, leadership concerned about the whole of humanity, the leader of the quote unquote free world.
Yeah.
And what we see is something more like narcissistic, you know, gamemanship. And so I think that we need to be reminded, and I would encourage people remember that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and that
Salt.
we need not hate anyone, but we ought not also allow people to be abused and then and then let that become normalized. We can't become numbed, Brad, to this kind of violence. And it happened before. It's funny in 1935, and this is one of the things I was reading and research as this February. This is Black History Month. Langston Hughes, the poet and writer, in 1935, during the rise of fascism,
Hmm.
he said, "The Negro people. This is not new to the Negro people. The
Right.
rise of fascism."
Sure.
So he said, he was saying the violence that we see directed toward the Jewish people or directed toward homosexuals or directed toward the quote unquote socialists or union trade members uh, was not new because Black people have received it and received it in double doses after the end of slavery.
Oh, yeah,
after the
absolutely,
end
yeah.
of slavery. So,
Well,
we are the salt of the earth. This is not a Trimble quote. I just heard it actually during the protests in Minneapolis. Someone was saying, "You remember, we're the salt of the earth, and salt melts ice."
I love that. And that image of salt melts ice and light dissipates the darkness of the chaos of ice agents and evil empire, which is a lot of what our current administration is all about. And the image I just have in mind in terms of the application of salt melts ice and light beats darkness, I believe is embodied in the two recent victims that have been so
Mhm.
mindful here. When Renee Good, her last words to the person who shot her through the window of her car was, "I'm not mad at you." She said, "I'm not mad at
Wow.
you." Then he shot her dead. And then the image I have of the man who was killed last week. His name slips my mind, and I hate that. But Petrie, is that his image was that he was a nurse at a VA facility, helping
Yeah,
injured
ICU nurse,
ICU nurse at a veterans hospital, helping people walk in to do things like that who had lost limbs and such in war. Yeah,
Alex
that's
Preddy. Alex Preddy.
Alex Preddy. And so that's the images I have. What I mean by that is the application of what you're sharing there of the salt melts ice and the darkness is dissipated by the light is embodied in people like Alex Preddy and and Rachel. Not
And you
Rachel,
know what
but
happened? You know what happened?
Renee Good.
I
Yeah.
and we're older. I'm a little older than you, Brad, but,
Well, not
I do
much,
know
not
what
much.
happened. I do know what happened after Martin Luther King was assassinated. Other people, Jesse Jackson and other people picked up the baton. And this is what's gonna happen, what is already happening. I mean, I've met some of the people, who will go unnamed, but who said, "I can't just watch people get killed and not pick up the
Right.
baton and do whatever my little part might be." And it maybe this is maybe happening on social media platforms and podcasts as well, because people have to realize, I'm not mad at any particular person who signed up to get that $50,000 to join the border patrol because you probably needed that money and it's employment. But I am mad at a policy as a country that would embrace state-sanctioned violence
Yes.
and then criticize other countries, for
Oh
being,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
violent and corrupt.
Yeah. Just amazing. We live in amazing times, and yet Jesus still speaks into these times with a voice that cuts through all the nonsense and gets right to the heart of matter. And you've got right to it. About love God, love neighbor is what the Bible says, what Jesus said, and it's embodied out in what I love what you said about salt melts ice and light dissipates the darkness. So we'll leave it at that. And oh,
Brad, to
yes,
my
sir.
listeners and view is my granddaughter. I won't say my granddaughter had a sweatshirt on going to school, and we said, "Well, what does that sweatshirt say?" And we read it. It said, "Kindness all day long."
Love it. Well, and that's what we're called to do, my friend. Kindness and all day long. I love that. So we'll leave the last word to your granddaughter. Love it. Kindness all day long. Well, thank you for being part of this great conversation here today, Bishop Trimble. And I thank you for our kind listeners for tuning into our conversation here. You've been listening to the To Be Encouraged podcast with Bishop Julius C. Trimble. I'm your co host, Reverend Dr. Brad Miller. This is the podcast where we look to offer an encouraging word to an often discouraged world.